This is Paul. Today, Kale tweeted at me, I wonder what Paul Vanderkay thinks of the most popular, most watched TV pundit go viral for begging everyone to pray 10 minutes a day for our future. As an Episcopalian, might be of interest in this little corner. This is so far outside the bounds of polite discourse. Now, a lot of people have sent this video to me of Tucker Carlson. I have watched Tucker Carlson's interview with one or two people. That's it for my knowledge of Tucker Carlson for the most part. But this video is going viral, and it came out very soon before he was fired from Fox News. So let's take a little look.
It might be time to start to reassess the terms we use to describe what we're watching. So when I started at Heritage, the presumption was, and this is a very Anglo-American.
Now, I actually did go back and, for context, watch more of this video. And a lot of the rest of the video, the clip was quite well made. A lot of the rest of the video was he's talking to people in the room. This is obviously a room full of people that he's comfortable with, a group that he's familiar with, a group he feels at home at.
An assumption that the debates we're having are kind of rational debates about the way to get to mutually agreed upon outcomes.
Okay. Right there, it's very important. And this, I think, gets very much into this video that I played from Tim Keller, and I'll just play a little bit of it just to remind you what I'm talking about.
He calls it programmatic secularism rather than procedural secularism. In other words, it used to be the government was secular in the sense of being a neutral umpire and said, okay, we want to make sure everybody has a level playing field to make your case and live your lives. But programmatic secularism goes like this. Put it this way. In the 60s and 70s, even the 50s, if somebody wrote a book saying it's okay to be gay, that would probably be not publishable because it would be banned as obscene speech, right? Today, if you try to write a book or say it's not okay to be gay, now it's also condemned as obscene speech, except it's called hate speech. And what's happened is there was a kind of hegemony. It wasn't pluralistic. There was a kind of nominal Christian hegemony that really did run things. And when that fell apart, now we realize, well, who's going to get in charge of defining hate speech and obscene speech? And progressives said, we're going to do it. And so what they actually have done is they are imposing a kind of programmatic, hard secularism. And conservatives and Christians have seen that. They say, you know what, you're not being neutral anymore. You're really actually pushing. You're actually saying you have to keep your religion totally, totally private, when our religion doesn't allow that. Now, by the way, it's the same problem with Islam. So they're going to have, the more Muslims that are here, the more problems they're going to have there too. But the issue is that conservatives are pushing back, wrongly, I think, and are saying, yeah, liberal democracy doesn't work. There's a lot of conservatives saying we need Christian nationalism.
Okay. So there's, in a sense, the frame.
Right? So we all want the country to be more prosperous and free and people to be less oppressed or whatever. And so we're going to argue about tax rates, and I think higher tax gets us there. I'm a Keynesian, and you disagree, you're an Austrian or whatever. But the objective is the same. And so we write our papers, and they write their papers, and may the best papers win. I don't think that's what we're watching now at all. I don't think we're watching a debate over how to get to the best outcome. I think that's completely wrong. And I've come to this conclusion, and I should say at the outset, I'm an Episcopalian, so don't take any theological advice from me, because I don't.
Okay, now keep that in mind, because a big part of what I think inspires people from this is, let's say, hardlinism.
Have any. I grew up in the shallowest faith tradition that's ever been invented. It's not even a Christian religion at this point. I say with
But he's still in it.
shame. But I'm just saying this as an observer of what's going on. There is no way to assess, say, the transgenderist movement with that mindset. Policy papers don't account for it at all. If you have people who are saying, I have an idea, let's castrate the next generation. Let's sexually mutilate children. I'm sorry, that's not a political debate. What? It has nothing to do with politics. What's the outcome we're desiring here?
Okay, so I know that triggered a bunch of you. If you can just hold on to yourselves through this. What he's talking about is a general orientation. He's talking about the fact, just like Tim Keller was talking about, that on one hand, you've got sort of surfaces up there. Let's negotiate outcomes that we all can agree on versus no, we have to debate, in fact, what outcomes are good and what outcomes are bad. We have to, we're trying to, in our politics, debate these much more massive issues of good, bad, right, and wrong. And that's, basically where Keller then goes with this.
We actually need to get, the state needs to be overtly Christian, overtly Protestant, or there needs to be, the Catholic integralists say that the Catholic Church should be the state church. And what they're saying is there's absolutely no way to get that moral consensus. We're always going to be fragmented. Liberal democracy doesn't work. And it is a crisis because the fact is, as long as everybody was a nominal Christian, liberal democracy works, and it doesn't. We're not that anymore. Liberal democracy undermined Christianity and religion in general and created this situation where we truly are divided. And now the old liberal democratic proceduralism doesn't bring us together. We're just at each other's throats. We have alternate views of reality, totally different views of reality. And I don't have a good way forward. I mean, if you were asking me that question, I'm not going to answer it because I'm actually thinking it out. I still think liberal democracy is way better than Catholic integralism or Protestant Christian nationalism. But I also feel like you've got to call out the progressives, to say this, what you consider democracy actually isn't. It is actually an imposition of your worldview on us. So I feel like we have to call both sides out. But when I do that, I am, maybe Carrie, I am called both sidism, playing, or being, trying to be apolitical when you can't be. I don't think that's possible. But I do think it's fair to say, sorry, right and left, I don't know what the alternative is, but what you are proposing is absolutely wrong. Well,
okay. So back to this.
An androgynous population? Is that really what are we arguing for that? No.
And that sounds like sort of a, throwaway line, but that's not a crazy thing in terms of what, at least I think, a small segment of America implicitly is calling for. I mean, you can take John Lennon's song, Imagine there are no boys nor girls. And most of us would say, Viva la différence, or be anything you want to be. And so that's sort of where this has gone. And of course, the way that the conversation about, I've been tempted to make a video just on this transgender controversy because it is so easy to lose your head with these things. And okay, it's easy to lose your head. It's fun to lose your head. Then what? That's the question, because part of where secularism and liberal democracy arose out of was, well, can we not kill each other over these things? And again, now it started just with Protestant Catholic killing each other over these things. And we said, okay, we've got these big significant differences, and we're going to have to figure out how to not kill each other over these things. How can we do this? And what we've been seeing is that people on both sides are, having issues. We can jump to. I think
that because you have
ContraPoints, and well, okay, no more liberalism. All right, then, how well do you think your tribe is really going to do if this thing gets existential? That's been if you go back to the civil rights movement, there was during the 50s and 60s and before that, and even after that into the 70s, there's a fierce debate over, okay, well, how can we address the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow? And many voices were, there's not going to be any answer to this. So early Malcolm X, black nationalism. We need to have a black nationalist state carved out somewhere in the American South where we can be the majority. And okay, just think that through. How would that go? You might be the majority in your little carved out slice of, let's say, Mississippi or Alabama, but you're going to be surrounded by a more white, less diverse, less integrated whole, and you're going to be either a perpetual client or perpetual enemy. Watch enough of the Glenn Show to look at a couple of thinking people following those ideas through. You're going to carve out transnationalism. It's already a word. Transgender nationalism, and have a little place, maybe. I don't know where the transgender population is at its. You're going to get San Francisco, and that's going to be your homeland. How's that going to go? Probably not well. And so, one way or another, if we're not going to kill each other, we're going to have to figure out how to live together and negotiate these things and use influence rather than bullying. So back to this talk.
I don't think anyone could defend that as a positive outcome. But the weight of the government and a lot of corporate interests are behind that. Well, what is that?
I agree with that, but they're not thinking through it either. Nobody's thinking through it because it's a utopia that will always be a utopia. It will always be Neverland.
Well, it's irrational. If you say, well, I think abortion is always bad. Well, I think sometimes it's necessary. That's a debate I'm familiar with. But if you're telling me that abortion is a positive good, what are you saying? Well, you're arguing for child sacrifice, obviously. It's not.
You didn't have to go to child sacrifice. I understand the direction, but part of the difficulty is in a political theater, once your enemies are for child sacrifice, well, now you can't even carve out a homeland for them. Then all there's left is extermination. And no. And I think part of the reason secularism developed and liberal secularism developed was because Christians found that genocide was not the answer. Genocide is not a Christian answer to our enemies. And the reason it's not a Christian answer to our enemies is because our master gave us the command to love our enemies. And so that then in many ways pushes the Christian back and says, okay, this person is advocating child sacrifice. What do we do? Now, as a nation, we have a democratic process that hopefully will continue to keep child sacrifice illegal. We're continuing to have the conversation about abortion, and the conversation has progressed. But we have to keep talking and not killing, and that means you've got to show some measure with language. Now, using the word evil should not be hate speech, but it should be used, framed properly, because I might think that certain socioeconomic systems are at their extreme evil, but seldom do we deal with any of these systems at their extreme. And Jesus himself used the word. He's talking about if your child asks you for a fish, do you give your child a snake? And then he says, even you who are evil, those who are evil, meaning all of us, we who are evil know how to give our children good things. So it's not necessarily, you can't say that evil is a four-letter word as such, even though E-V-I-L, yeah, I get it. And I'm not saying the word should be out of bounds. And I'm not even saying Tucker Carlson is using it inappropriately here. But it's a word that requires a lot of care, because if you use it in a certain way, you corner your rival into a place that both you and your rival may not be able to get back from without something unspeakable happening.
Not about like, oh, a teen girl gets pregnant and what do we do about that, and victims of rape. I get it. Of course I understand that, and I have compassion for everyone involved. But when the Treasury Secretary stands up and says, you know what you can do to help the economy? Get an abortion. Well, that's like an Aztec principle, actually. There's not a society in history that didn't practice human sacrifice. Not one. I checked. Even the Scandinavians, I'm ashamed to say. It wasn't just the Mesoamericans, it was everybody. So, that's what that is. What's the point of child sacrifice? Well, there's no policy goal entwined with that. No, that's a theological phenomenon. And that's kind of the point I'm making. None of this makes sense in...
And in all fairness, part of the reason I played Tim Keller is you can find Tim Keller make exactly this point, connecting abortion with child sacrifice. And I think, especially in a theological frame, it's a legitimate argument to make. But he's not at a theological podium. He's at a political podium.
In conventional political terms. When people or crowds of people, or the largest crowd of people at all, which is the federal government, the largest human organization in human history, decide that the goal is to destroy things, destruction for its own sake. Hey, let's tear it down. What you're watching is not a political movement, it's evil.
And now you're going to have to ask if, in fact, that is true of the federal government, because at least while we have a democracy, ideally, power in the federal government will continue to change hands and be responsive to, well, we want it to be responsive to good, bad, right, and wrong, and we also know it will always fall short, but we want it to be responsive to the will of the people, and hopefully, the idea behind Protestantism is if the nation has a conscience, hopefully the government will express the conscience of the nation.
So if you want to assess, and I'll put it in I'll stop with this. I'll put it in non-political, non-specific theological terms, and just say, if you want to know what's evil and what's good, what are the characteristics of those? And by the way, I think the Athenians would have agreed with this. This is not necessarily just a Christian notion. This is kind of I would say, widely agreed upon understanding of good and evil. What are its products? What do these two conditions produce? Well, good is characterized by order, calmness, tranquility, peace.
He should have gone to life, not necessarily order, because it's actually good is a habitable order. A habitable order, which means not too much order, or you go to tyranny. Watch Jordan Peterson's Exodus thing. Not too much chaos, or it's not habitable. It's the right balance of chaos and order, finding it right there. So, yes, order. You need order, but you also need, chaos and order is sort of like liberty and order, because chaos and liberty have a certain amount in common. They're not identical.
Whatever you want to call it. Lack of conflict, cleanliness. Cleanliness is next to godliness. It's true. It is.
Orderliness is basically, cleanliness is basically orderliness with respect to what belongs. You need a toilet and you need a kitchen, and the two should have a certain amount of distance between them.
And evil is characterized by their opposites.
See, and he should have gone with life and death, because there's a flourishing to life, not cancerous flourishing, but there's a balanced flourishing to life. And evil, the wages of sin is death. And the gift of God is eternal life. There you go.
Violence, hate, disorder, division, disorganization, and filth. So,
but now almost all of those words could have had another word paired to it to say, okay, filth in the toilet, clean in the kitchen. But even what's in the kitchen is borderline. If all of the vegetables that you have picked, all of the meat that you have butchered, all of the milk that you have gathered will spoil, will become filth. I mean, need more nuance. Now, it's just a short-lived video clip. I'm not going to hold everybody to that standard. But now that you asked me, don't back yourself or your enemies into a corner that they can't get out of unless you are intending to do something final. And it's not the way to go.
If you are all in on the things that produce the latter basket of outcomes, what you're really advocating for is evil. That's just true. I'm not calling for a religious war, far from it. I'm merely calling for an acknowledgement of what we're watching, which is not what, and I'm not certain.
Okay, now there's a lot of black and whiteism here, all right? Good, bad, right, wrong. And those of you who have listened to me enough know you always have the antithesis and you always have the spectrum. You've always got both of those dynamics. If you say everything is just shades of gray, nope, you need black and white. Everything is just black and white, nope, you need shades of gray.
Certainly not backing the Republican Party. I mean, ugh. I'm not making a partisan point at all.
Man who was fired from Fox News.
I'm just noting what's super obvious. Like, those of us who are in our mid-50s are caught in the past in the way that we think about this.
Now, that comment is super important because right now, a whole group of us, Jordan Peterson, just turned 60. Me, just short of 60. Brett Weinstein, all the IDW types, Mary Harrington, 50, a whole bunch of us right here, born between basically 1960 and 1970, or 1963 and 1973, we're all kind of in this middle transition period, and he looks a heck of a lot younger than I am, but I didn't check what age he is, but sounds like he's closer to my age than I thought he was.
One side's like, no, I've got this idea, and we've got this idea, and let's have a debate about our ideas. They don't want a debate. Those ideas won't produce outcomes that any rational person would want under any circumstances. Those are manifestations of some larger force acting upon us. Spirits
at war, spirits in battle. You find a lot of that conversation on this channel from me.
It's just so obvious. It's completely obvious. And I think two things. One, we should say that and stop engaging in these totally fraudulent debates where we are using the terms that we used in 1991 when I started at Heritage, as if maybe, I could just win the debate if I marshaled more facts. I've tried that, doesn't work.
This fact thing is a very big deal.
And two, maybe we should all take just like 10 minutes a day to say a prayer about it. I'm serious. Like, why not? And I'm saying that to you not as some kind of evangelist. I'm literally saying that to you as an Episcopalian, the Samaritans of our time. I'm coming to you from the most humble and lowly theological position you can. I'm literally an Episcopalian, okay?
All right. Now, what I did clip is a little bit from the episode 13 of the Exodus series. And if you're curious about this, you can find it on Twitter. I don't lose my Twitter account if I make a little clip of the Exodus seminar and put it on there. And they talk about prayer, and it was a good little clip. And they're wrestling with that question of prayer. But I wanted to, again, we're very much in what Tim Keller is talking about here. In a recent Dark Horse podcast, Brett and Heather were talking about Thomas Sowell's book, Intellectuals and Society. And it was very interesting. They were talking about the Oliver Stone movie about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And Brett was, again, sort of stuck on his facts versus metaphorical truth hang up where he's at.
Of the Cuban Missile Crisis, because it accurately represents something that, you and I didn't live through. We're not old enough to have lived through it, much less lived through it at an old enough age to grok it in real time. So the representation of the Cuban Missile Crisis that we see on screen comes to supplant the actual history for a large number of people.
It's not a fictionalization. It is. It's fiction. It's portrayed as historical fiction, which historical fiction is a broad genre in which I think you hope for the ability to learn some truth about history, but any particular thing that you take from historical fiction, you would want to fact check that,
of course,
before assuming that it was actually something.
And so they're really caught up on this, and this was part of another video that they had done, which I watched some of it, when they're basically talking about selection, which is something that we in this little corner have been talking about for a long time.
In the wake of that, I gotta say acquaintance at this point because we haven't interacted a lot, but I hope that we meet in real life at some point and become friends with the amazing, extremely talented Clifton Duncan about the inconvenient meanings or connotations of words. With regard to selective samples, Sowell writes, filtering the sample of information available to the public can take many forms. For example, Bennett Cerf, I'm not sure which, the founder of Random House Publishers, at one time during the Second World War, suggested that books critical of the Soviet Union be withdrawn from circulation. When the American economy was recovering from a recession in 1983 and unemployment was down in 45 out of the 50 states, ABC News simply chose to feature a report on one of the 5 states where that was not so, or as they put it, quote, where unemployment is most severe. As if these states were just more severe examples of a more general condition, when in fact, they were very atypical of existing trends in unemployment. So that's the first little excerpt, just his framing of the issue and 2 examples of how in the past media has led, well, the first one is a call for actual censorship of books. But the idea that ABC looked at 50 states, found a trend that should make all of us feel good in 45 of 50 of them, and decided to report on one of the others while actively eliding the fact that this was the exception is, well, as you said earlier, back when journalism was happening, this was back when journalism was supposedly happening. And still, this filtering of facts, while making it seem that you are getting the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, has never been the case, honestly.
So,
and there's the issue. You always have the problem of selection. So then ABC, obviously, did they say it was the 80s, during the Reagan administration? Ronald Reagan wasn't necessarily the favorite for a left-leaning media, so instead of cheering the rebound of the economy, wanted to portray it in a more negative light, could have other reasons for doing so. Someone sent me this video, why Jubilee is like, and apparently this person didn't want to say porn on their thing because anyway, I had never heard of this channel Jubilee, and it was very interesting. First, here, let's see how much of it if we can play it.
Well, today I want to base my entire video on that moment here. I saw that clip in Tara Mooney's video on Jubilee, and to be fair, a lot of the things I'm going to say today connect to what she said in her video, but I also wanted to look at it through a different lens to kind of complement what she did. To give a bit more context, the clip is from a video titled, Do All Christians Think the Same?
And I didn't know anything about the channel Jubilee, didn't know anything about any of these channels, which was I appreciate you guys sharing stuff with me. It's like, this is you.
Participants are given prompts and then position themselves on the spectrum depending on whether they agree with the prompt. And so for every prompt, this woman in particular has shown that she's a hardcore Christian. She's very conservative. At some point in the video, she explained that she did not support the LGBT community because, trigger warning, homophobia, quote, "Where do you draw the line?" she asks. If
You can't even say homophobia without a trigger warning?
anybody can love anybody, then a grown man can love a boy, and it's fine. All of that led to that moment at the end of the video, and I find this moment super interesting because it's extremely rare on Jubilee. I mean, it's not uncommon to hear that sort of dog whistle communication on the show, but Jubilee turned those debates into a game. People generally end with hugs and laugh and "yay, that was fun" type of thing. To be fair, little parenthesis here, but debate culture in general is very much like that, you know. It's quite common to see students in debating society argue against this or that topic that is quite heavy, you know, immigration, human rights, etc. And then once the debate is over, they all go together, get a pint, and that's it. It was just a game. But something different happened on that episode. The woman, a Christian herself, refused to high-five the hardcore homophobic participant, and by doing so, she subtly reminded us that this is not a game, that these ideologies are deeply harmful. So why did I title this video
In other words, here's the same issue. So the question is, what should this get? So then of course, I went down and I tracked down the video and I watched the video, and it was interesting because, of course, they're making a video and they're getting all of the hot button issues, and it's a very clever premise how you can kind of put people on different sides. This one was, I think,
kissing until I get engaged, which a lot of people don't believe me about, but I had a 2-year relationship and I promise it happened and it was hard. You're strong, girl. I didn't particularly like it, but I just find so much strength and closeness to God in preserving my physical expression of love for people. Even though it's very, very far from easy, it's something I'm so excited for. To be able to tell that person, I saved the most intimate part of myself for you, because God was the only one who had a key to my heart before this.
If I died now, I would go to heaven. 3, 2, 1, go.
now he's a gay man, and so he's been the topic of some of this, and probably grew up in a black church.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I'm a good person, but I'm saved by faith in Jesus Christ who forgives me of my sin. I know where I placed my faith, and that's why I know where I'm going to go.
I don't know, it's hard to know exactly what specifically is considered the biggest sins that will keep someone from going to heaven, especially for me when I haven't put as much thought into it as I should.
Christianity is not about just making sure you're checking off all the boxes to go to heaven. I feel like that robs us of the heaven that's present here on earth. All I'm responsible for is doing my best every day, and I pray that I do that every day, and I think that's true for everybody. Everybody is just responsible for their best.
It was quite remarkable that the people who put together this video, in the 3 people they highlighted, pretty much nailed many of the responses that you hear as a pastor. You earn your way there. Saved by grace through faith, which is basically Protestant, Calvinist, evangelical orthodoxy, and not to exclude the Orthodox and the Roman Catholics. I'll let y'all take your work on that. And then, no, judgmentalism is just bad. And so if you're worried about hell, you lose out on the heaven that is on earth. So, and then, of course, you'll have at the end, it's interesting because you have the
High five! Christian high fives all around.
And it was weird because that other video said this woman didn't high five anyone, and she clearly seemed to high five everyone. And then you sort of have the announcement from the producers of the video what exactly this is about.
This is the whitest thing I've ever done.
Dude, I feel like I could probably step on every one of these lines at a different point in my life. Because I grew up a Christian, but like changed so much over time.
If you want to grow and evolve with us,
So this is clearly the ethos of this channel and the kinds of things that they like to do. And it was sort of interesting how she just didn't like it. She did not want these people getting along together. She wanted the antithesis. She wanted white and black. She wanted right and wrong. And so would she have been more satisfied if people just went to the other side of the room and gave each other the finger? And then what? Well, then you're all going to go home. Or maybe you have to burn down somebody's house. Or maybe you have to exile them from the country. Or maybe, that's the question with respect to, okay, we're having increasingly radical disagreements on some very basic things about what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. So what are your options? And so again, just like in a way, J.K. Rowling's increasingly, no, we're not going to be liberal about this. We're going to be clear. So we've got two sides that are increasingly clear. Now, something that really helped me in this was Ross Douthat's op-ed that he wrote today. Across the Donald Trump presidency and immediately thereafter, there was a lot of talk about realignment. Everyone could see that the Republican coalition was becoming more working class and the Democratic coalition more dominated by upper class professionals. The question was whether that shift would fundamentally transfer the policy commitments of both parties along lines suggested by Trump's populist 2016 campaign, or whether Republicans and Democrats would snap back into their pre-Trump posture once they left the White House. That question has not yet been fully answered. Seen from some angles, the parties should reshape by their challenging coalition. Seen from others, a deep realignment seems stillborn. Culture warriors are now more influential than class warriors on the left, but Democrats are still resolutely redistributist. The right is more protective of Medicare and Social Security than it was in 2012, but House Republicans, remember, this is where having a little bit of memory is really helpful, because remember when Social Security was going to be privatized and some people were out there saying, don't make Medicare a government program. Don't tell her it's a government program. But if you look at culture and intellectual life rather than policy and political coalitions, you can see a realignment that's more coherent and complete. This transformation of mentality is as much as substance. The newest and especially youngest right is defined by a politics of suspicion, a deep distrust of all institutions, a comfort with outsider forms of knowledge and conspiratorial theories, a hostility towards official mouthpieces and corporate government alliances, a skepticism about American empire, and a pessimism about the American future that used to be much more the province of the left. Now, what is important to note in a lot of this is, let's look at someone like Rod Dreher. Rod Dreher, for a long time, has been hitting the panic button about gay marriage in America and how it will change marriage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know who he has good conversations with? Andrew Sullivan. You know who Andrew Sullivan is? Probably one of the people in the blogosphere who did as much as anyone to make gay marriage a reality in America. Now, isn't that funny? Rod Dreher is not a tyrannist. Rod Dreher is not looking to have half of the country sent into exile or re-education camps or anything like this. But he makes pretty strong, clear-line noises. My guess is Tucker Carlson makes pretty bold statement noises like this, but in reality, Tucker Carlson probably has, and this will be mocked, a number of gay friends that he gets along very well with. And chances are good he might have qualms, I don't know if he does or doesn't, qualms about their gay marriage, but he lives with them and he's nice to them and he's friends with them and so on and so forth. Part of what's interesting about the high fives at the end of their little session together is that this face-to-face-ism, this relationalism, this personalism. Now, someone might say, well, these are all Christians, and so that's what holds them together. And you know what? I think if you did this with non-Christians, the vast majority of the people would do exactly the same thing, especially given their age group. In other words, we have all of this messaging going on at the extremes. But you know what? I don't think there's a lot of people that really do want to actually hurt the other side. It's sort of playing on TV screens like all of our violent movies. And if someone is sort of a key person in this, according to Ross Douthat, it may well be Tucker Carlson. The master key to understanding Tucker Carlson's programming wasn't ideology, it was suspicion. He had been the reliable sort of cable news pundit once upon a time, the cheerful partisan, the crossfire Republican, the talking points purveyor, even if he purveyed them with a little more irony than most. Then something changed after the Iraq War. Look at Rod Dreher. The Iraq War, if you read enough Rod Dreher, at least you read him far enough back, the Iraq War changed Rod Dreher. It changed a whole bunch of people that I was reading 10 years ago or so, before I found Jordan Peterson, who they all sort of were in this mixed up space that, you know, Vietnam, I just did that podcast on, or I just listened to the rest is history on the Vietnam War. It was on the end of the Vietnam War, on the fall of Saigon. I thought it was excellent. And of course, Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook in the same age group. After the Iraq War, after Jon Stewart helped kill Crossfire, he gradually became disillusioned, radicalized. You can see it before his Fox News gig came along in the way he wrote about Donald Trump in 2016. And then you could see it in the way he ran his show. People say it was fake, the bow-tied rich kid chasing the populist audience, and for sure there was some of the audience captured that afflicted almost everyone in the pundit game. That's how Carlson ended up treating the right's election fraud mania with kid gloves. Not giving it the endorsement that other hosts gave it, but affording it against his private judgment, a costly to Fox News form of unwarranted respect. This is, in some ways, exactly what this girl is complaining about. She's complaining about Jubilee doing these things, and then I watched a few more of the shows on Jubilee. She's complaining about, no, it's this. How can you, on one hand, say these things about the other side and then high-five them? How can we? And in fact, the big, I remember, so of course you had the Tea Party and then you had Donald Trump. And the big thing about Donald Trump was that, unlike all of these other rhinos, Republicans in name only, Donald Trump was actually going to go into the White House and really do it. And what was so funny was that him really doing it was a pantomime, just like the other side was. What all really changed with Donald Trump? Now, you might argue that if he had been in longer, but that doesn't matter. He wasn't in longer. Is it just more pantomime? Is that really what we're doing politically? I don't want to just say it's just that. There certainly is more of that. But Carlson wasn't the right-wing Carlson wasn't like the right-wing personalities, a Mark Levin, let's say, who surrendered to Trumpism reluctantly because that's where the listeners wanted them to go. He was a Trumpist only insofar as Trump, when he himself was heading away towards a rejection of everything the Western political establishment stood for, an extreme open-mindedness towards everything that was ruled out of bounds. There's something really funny going on today where, and I just had it on the little live stream I had this morning, you're not allowed to say, and it's like, I hear what's not allowed to be said all the time. Now, that doesn't mean that, Twitter wasn't suspending accounts and YouTube doesn't suspend accounts and that there isn't a degree of this and that, but compared to what Brett and Heather were writing about in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, just by virtue of the media platform, what you're not allowed to say sure gets said a lot by just about everyone. And so in some ways, sort of the lid is off about what's going on. Just read a good biography of Malcolm X and look at what he wanted at certain points in his life. I lived through the 70s. Look at the kind of political violence we had in the 70s. The 2020s are in some ways like the 70s, but praise God, we don't have the kinds of bombings we had in the 70s or the kinds of riots we had in the 70s. What we have is a lot of talk and still a lot of openness. Tucker Carlson isn't going anywhere. A couple of people said, I think he's going to run for president. Others said, no, that's not going to be it. But you can imagine that the minute Daily Wire heard that Tucker Carlson was let go, they had a meeting and said, what number can we put in front of him, really? Daily Wire Plus had that thing. At least I don't know this political film, but I would imagine Daily Wire Plus would love to add Tucker Carlson to their stable of people. Maybe Tucker Carlson is too big. Maybe Tucker Carlson is going to have TC Plus and start, in fact, his own because, bigger than Ben Shapiro. Although it was interesting because when I was listening to some of the news about him, people were like, he's getting 3 million nightly. And although I always sort of in my low resolution imagination thought, surely the Fox Media platform is way bigger than YouTube, even though I've heard Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson and many others say Joe Rogan is basically the biggest talk show celebrity around. I thought, yeah, but not really bigger than cable. No, really bigger than cable. If anything, this is, again, another data point along the lines of the demise of mass media, because no one is concerned that Tucker Carlson is going to go hungry or homeless anytime soon. I don't know what he made at Fox, but whether he starts something himself or takes a big check from someone else, yeah, he'll have a big payday. And perhaps the kinds of sponsors that Fox News relies on, Procter and Gamble, all the usual suspects on Google, Apple, maybe, they're having a hard time selling ads. Oh, he'll sell plenty of ads on YouTube. He'll sell plenty of ads on Daily Wire Plus or the new Tucker Carlson Plus network. Which is why his show was the farthest right on cable news, but also sometimes the farthest left. It could assemble a set of Carlson clips encompassing everything from his frequent interviews with Glenn Greenwald to his successful opposition to the U.S. conflict with Iran in 2019-2020 that made him seem like a George W. Bush-era anti-war activist given a primetime show in Fox by some mischievous genie. It could assemble a similar array in which he sounded left-wing notes on economics. These forays are not in tension with his willingness to entertain the far right's great replacement paranoia about immigration or fixate on a possible FBI role in instigating the January 6 riot. They were all part of the same hermeneutic. For any idea with an establishment imprimatur, absolute suspicion. For any outsider or skeptic, sympathy or trust. It didn't have to be political or contemporary either. The UFO mystery, he was there for it. The Kennedy assassination and the CIA, he had questions. His COVID coverage was a notable example, and he goes into that. Addressing Trump on what Trump did with COVID. Remember, the whole COVID, I was driving home from some lakes. I said, remember 14 days to flatten the curve? Remember, berries. Remember, 14 days to flatten the curve. Yeah, wasn't that sweet? The young Reaganite or the George W. Bush admirer certainly believed the media was liberal and that the Ivy League could not be trusted, but he or she believed in the CIA and NATO, in General Motors and Wall Street, in Coca-Cola and the American Medical Association and the United States Marines. Not so far for conservatives who have come of age since the Iraq War, the financial crisis, and the Great Awakening, alienated from many more American institutions than their predecessors, staring at a record of elite failure and social landscape. It seems there's little to conserve. They increasingly start out where Carlson ended up, in a posture of reflexive distrust, where if any important American institution takes a position, the position is to be probably on the other side. So the underlying boomer foundation is still solid enough, for a little longer at least, that any successor will probably do just fine in the ratings. Remember my conversation with Kale and Sam about 60 Minutes? It was funny watching Brett and Heather talk about 60 Minutes, informing their younger audience about 60 Minutes. She doesn't want them to give high fives. She obviously missed them gives high fives, but high fives they gave. Any subsequent Carlson enterprise on any platform won't command the kind of audience that's available at 8 p.m. in Rupert Murdoch's empire. But it's unlikely that Carlson's successor will embody the cultural realignment as fully or reveal as much about the alienated future of American conservatism as the man who just disappeared from Fox. My research into Tucker Carlson brought me into Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And I thought, oh, isn't this interesting? Now, again, I think Douthit is right. Still plenty of boomers around. People are nervous for after the boomers. You know, we should take real warnings about imagining necessarily who's on the ticket for the next presidential campaign. Could it be another Trump-Biden rematch? But both old men. And, well, this sort of brings up Eric Weinstein conversations about the boomers finally relinquishing their money and their power. Well, we'll see, but things are very interesting, and I'm not at all surprised. You've got someone like Robert F. You've got another Kennedy running for president, and he's the rebel outsider. And, of course, you've got Brett and Heather, who, of course, were favored professors at Nate Heil's four-year institution, Evergreen, who quite amazingly and reliably take positions on their program that 10 years ago, I can't imagine either of them imagining they would take. So, yes, I listened to Tucker, and he made noises that me, as maybe a slightly older minister, would be a little reticent about making. But the thing that always comes to mind for me, the meme of the monument, is the dogs at the gate. Because after the little conversation that they had about, you know, the conservative Christian woman of color versus the gay guy who left his church, afterwards they high five. Is this intersectionality? Could be. They've learned to sort of look at each other and have disagreements without being disagreeable. And from the cast of this Jubilee show, if I can find the right clip. Did I close them? The cast of this Jubilee show, that seems to be their goal. They want to talk about these things. They want to have the conversation. And They want to be able to have it in a strong language, but they also want to be able to go out for coffee afterwards or whatever their drink of choice is. So it's unsettling to watch all of this speech and imagine people are backing themselves into corners, but I'm not so sure that's what's happening. I sort of wonder if actually this is more of what's happening. Now that's, I think, overall a good thing. But part of what it also means is that we might all just sort of be, to a certain degree, fooled and bewitched by our faces on screens. So all of our battles are fought virtually, just like the violence and sex and warfare that we see on screens. But when it comes to how I actually treat my neighbor, even if my neighbor is of the other political party, I'll take in their mail when they're on vacation. They lent me their house key so I could put it right on their dining room table. Did I steal from them? Did I betray them? Did I do any of those things? They may vote for a different party. So that doesn't mean that I don't think we should be measured with our speech. Yet, given all of the ways that all of our navigational signals have been and continue to be transformed by all of these screens, I wonder. So, you wanted to know what I thought of the video? That's what I thought of the video. I'm sure you'll have ideas. Go ahead and leave a comment.